Hi, my name is Latanya.
I'm Mariana.
I'm Avery.
And I'm Pharrell.
So the movement we decided to analyze was the sit and stand movement. So we analyzed this movement for our original client, which was Mariana. And throughout this, we based our intervention as well as our overall program based on her deficiency in overall movement for this specific analysis. Then our sit to stand is an everyday functional movement. Seems very simple, like people our age don't have any problem getting up from like a chair or even like off the ground. But as we age, it's more difficult. The longer we go and the harder our joints and everything are. Next, our measurements for the sit and stand, we use quantitative and qualitative variables to identify deviations across all 4 phases of the sit to stand movement. We classified skill level using motor learning, like things we learned throughout the class period, and different like online tools as well. And then we diagnosed main impairments like strength and overall control during the sit to stand movement.
Okay, so for the quantitative variables, like she said, we measured the hip, knee, and ankle angles. We did 3 reps and it took Mari about 7.35 seconds to perform them. The base of support is going to be the feet on the floor, and we use the goniometer app to measure the hip flexion and the knee extension angle to assess range of motion and control during the concentric phase. And then for the qualitative findings, we assessed the smoothness, coordination, and balance as she performed the sit and stand. And then she also showed a strong postural control. The only compensation, or we saw 2 compensations. She had slight valgus knees as she was coming up, and then she also lifted her foot slightly just to compensate the movement. And then for the sit to stand movement phase, we have flexion momentum phase, which this is the initial forward lean when you're coming up from the chair. So this includes like trunk flexion, weight shifts towards the feet, and then the momentum will begin to build as you're standing. Next, we have the momentum transfer phase, which is the body transitioning from the sitting to the standing movement, which ends up moving the weight from the chair to the legs, and then your center of mass shifts upward and forward. Then we have the extension phase, which is like the hips, the knees, and the ankles that extend to raise the body fully upright. And then we have the stabilization phase, which just has the body like maintain balance and postural control once you're fully upright. The greatest deviation was during the extension phase because the client showed a slight valgus knees as she was trying to stand up.
So now we have the diagnosis of impairments. So the primary impairments that affected my sit to stand performance were 1, quadricep weakness, 2 was weakness in the gluteus maximus and medius, as well as hip abductor instability, which was causing the knee valgus when I was coming up from the sit to stand, and over-reliance on momentum versus controlled force, and the last one was limited movement efficiency. So for the deviations, our first one is my foot was lifting whenever I was coming up from the sit to stand movement, and that was because I was relying on momentum rather than using my lower extremity muscles to come up with the strength. So basically, if the feet lift off the ground during the sit to stand, that typically means that, or I was using excessive forward trunk momentum instead of generating adequate lower extremity force. And that can be due to possible weakness in the quadriceps or poor balance when coming up. The second one was the arm push-off, which reduced lower extremity force. So I was using my arms when coming up from the sit to stand as well, and that's because my legs, my quadriceps couldn't generate enough force through the quads and glutes, and this may also reflect reduced confidence or fear of instability when rising to stand. The third performance deviation was knee valgus, and that is due to hip abductor weakness, which caused the medial collapse of the knee and that just suggests weakness of the gluteus medius and minimus. The last one was my hip extension was at 89 degrees, which is slightly below neutral, and because I didn't reach full hip extension, that may indicate that I have tight hip flexors, and again, gluteus maximus weakness, which prevents me from fully coming up. So the interpretation of these results was the data suggest for strength that the compensations we observed, such as the arm push-off, the feet lifting up, the incomplete hip extension, and the reduced lower extremity strength, was primarily due to the quadriceps and the glutes. So this is insufficient extensor torque, which leads to these compensatory strategies. What the data suggest about motor control is a normal sit-to-stand requires a smooth sequence of trunk flexion and anterior weight shift and vertical rise. Deviations may indicate impaired motor control and reliance on compensations. What the data suggests about coordination and stability is knee valgus, trunk deviations, and difficulty maintaining alignment point to impaired postural stability. So altered trunk lower extremity coordination due to stability issues. The link to functional independence was the sit-to-stand ability is a strong predictor of independent mobility and fall risk.
Okay, so the main goals of this program are to build lower body strength, especially in the quads and the glutes, while improving knee control and stability. We also want to make sure both sides of the knee, or both sides of the body, share equal amount of work, and that the trunk and legs move together smoothly. For motor learning, we're going to use both knowledge, the results, and knowledge of the performance feedback to help improve her performance. And then for variable practice, such as using a chair height or stance width, it's going to include to make the movement more adaptable, and we can encourage the athlete to pay attention of how their body feels during those movements. Okay. So these exercises put our goals into action. The controlled sit-to-stand focuses on the slow movements with even foot pressure. We can add a band or give cues to keep the knees out, which helps maintain proper alignment. A variable practice like using different chair height challenges coordination and adaptability. And then using external cues like nose over toes or push through the midfoot helps guide the athlete to proper mechanics. Okay, so for this one, this is like our 3-week schedule. We were having problems putting our Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday into the presentation, so I'm just gonna read it off here. But normally, this would be for an older person, since people our age don't really have problems like sitting and standing up. But this program progresses gradually over 4 weeks. In the first 2 weeks, the athlete is going to practice 3 times per week and with a focus on knee control and even loading using variable practice. And then in weeks 3 and 4, we're going to increase by challenging by adding lighter weight, load, or tempo changes. And we're going to make the tasks more complex, like using different chair heights, stance width, and external cues. And then the gradual progression allows our athlete to improve strength, coordination, and motor safety. And then our exercises for the first 2 weeks, on Monday it's going to be 3x8 sit-to-stand, slow tempo. Tuesday is going to be lateral band walks with knee control. Wednesday is variable practice, which is going to have a narrow stance and then wider stance. Thursday is going to be rest or light mobility, basically focusing on the hips and ankles. And then Friday, we're gonna do circuits. It's gonna be 3 rounds. It's gonna include 6 controlled sit-to-stands, 10-second balance hold at the top, and then 6 more sit-to-stands focusing on symmetry. And then for weeks 3 and 4, Monday is we're gonna add a light load, which like is just using a water bottle or a dumbbell. And then we're also gonna do 3x6 sits to stands with load. Tuesday is gonna be a tempo variation. So we're gonna do a 3-second lowering phase. Wednesday, we're going to vary the chair length, or chair height. So we're gonna use a lower chair, and that's gonna be 3 to 5 reps. And then Thursday, it's just gonna be again, rest and mobility, and then some band work if they want to. And then Friday, it's gonna be a mixed conditioning sit to stand session. We're gonna have a narrow stance, they're gonna do that 5 times. Wide stance, that's another 5 times, and then a loaded sit to stand, which is another 5 times. And then this is our intervention video that we made.
One of our interventions is the band resistant knee out. So what you want to do is keep your knees aligned with your toes and make sure that your knees don't cave in. Okay, so another intervention is external cueing. So as you come up, you'll lean slightly forward and push through the middle of your feet.
Our third intervention we decided was the controlled sit to stand. All it is like a slow tempo movement with making sure your feet are evenly placed and you're pushing the same amount of force from each foot.
Are you saying like similar format?
Good job. Like I said, slow movement and make sure you're evenly putting the same amount of force on each foot. Good job.
Okay, now for this intervention, we're going to do a narrow stance to stand. So what you're going to do is have your feet come closer together, more narrow, and you're still going to keep your knees aligned, making sure that you don't get forward. Just control your tempo. As you go from stand to stand.
Alright, so we're gonna do the same movements but on a lower chair, and you're gonna keep the same controlled momentum. Perfect.
All right, so the evaluation of intervention effectiveness. So most importantly, we wanted to improve control and smoother timing. We wanted to make sure Mariana produced less arm push-off and foot lift. And then we wanted to see a slight improvement in like knee alignment through this intervention. And then balance was more steady at top, we noticed as well through the interventions we placed for her. She still needs more glute and quad strength and knee control overall. And then key takeaways from our overall analysis of the sit to stand movement. Our client performed tasks but used predictable compensations such as valgus knee and foot lift. Issues point to glute and quad weaknesses like I mentioned earlier. And then through our motor learning framework, we are able to shape our intervention through like the associative stage and schema theory that we learned through class. And then strength and as well as feedback and variable practice improve overall performance. And then this shows how biomechanics as well as motor learning support real functional movements like this simple movement that we do on a day-to-day basis. And then here's our references. Thank you.